Chapter 1 of the Bobbsey Twins and Baby May. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Natalia. The Bobbsey Twins and Baby May by Laura Lee Hope. Chapter 2. Mysterious Spells. "Children, what has happened?" cried Mrs. Bobbsey, running in from the kitchen where she was helping Dinah get supper. She gave one glance at the collapsed elevated toy railway, saw Flossie and Freddie buried under an overturned chair, the ironing board, the engine, and cars, and gasped, "Oh, are you hurt?" Another loud clap of thunder drowned for a moment the answering voices of the children. Then, from the toy railroad wreck, came the faltering cry of Flossie as she said, "Oh, I got a terrible bang on the head. Oh, dear!" "You aren't hurt much, you're just frightened," said Nan soothingly, as she helped her small sister get out from beneath the ironing board. "And I got banged on the knee!" exclaimed Freddie. "Crickety grasshoppers!" exclaimed Bert, as he viewed the tangled mass of what a moment before had been a fine running toy railroad system. "Everything's gone to smash!" "Oh, it's a wreck! Let's play it's a railroad wreck!" shouted Freddie. "That's what it is, and I'll be the passenger that was hurt, and Flossie can be another passenger, and you must send for the ambulance, and Nan can be a trained nurse, and—" He had to stop for breath, he was talking so fast. "We don't need to pretend it was a wreck. It sure is one," declared Bert ruefully. "I hope my electric engine isn't smashed," he added. "Crawl out of there, Freddie, until I take a look." "Will I get a shock from the electric battery?" faltered Flossie, as Nan picked her up. "Yes, Bert, be careful about the electricity, especially in a lightning storm," admonished his mother. "There's no danger," the older Bobbsey boy insisted. "The wires are broken, I guess. Who pulled that ironing board down, anyhow?" "Freddie did," said Flossie. "I did not. You jiggled me and my head hit it. Anyhow, the thunder knocked it down," insisted Freddie. "Well, come out of the mess and clear the wreck away," suggested Mrs. Bobbsey. "It's almost time for supper. Daddy will soon be here, and—" A vivid flash of lightning that seemed to fill the room with its glare, followed by a terrific clap of thunder, stopped her from talking. "Oh, what a terrible storm!" murmured Mrs. Bobbsey. Into the room came waddling fat old Dinah, the colored cook. "Am any of my honey lambs hurt?" she inquired anxiously. "No one is hurt," replied Mrs. Bobbsey, "but oh, such a mess!" She looked at the conglomeration of chairs, ironing boards, boxes, and the toy railroad, now scattered over the floor. "We'll clean it up," said Bert cheerfully. "And while he and Nan are doing this, and while Mrs. Bobbsey is comforting Flossie and Freddie, who were alarmed over the storm, I shall take just a moment to tell my new readers a little something about this family. In the first book of this series, The Bobbsey Twins, you learn that Mr. and Mrs. Richard Bobbsey lived with their two sets of twins in the eastern city of Lakeport on Lake Metoka, where Mr. Bobbsey owned a large lumber yard. Bert and Nan, who had dark hair and eyes, were several years older than Flossie and Freddie, whose hair was light and whose eyes were blue. Bert and Nan and Flossie and Freddie were fond of fun and good times. They had plenty of them in the country, at school, at the seashore, and on trips. There are various books telling of the adventures of the Bobbsey twins in different places, at Grandpa's farm, on the deep blue sea, and out west. Just before this story opens, the Bobbsey twins had been camping, and had had some wonderful adventures. "Well, Bert, was anything broken?" asked his mother, when the "mess," as she called it, of the elevated railroad had been cleared away. "No, nothing much, Mother," he answered. "One of the cars lost a wheel, but that's always coming off. I guess Sam will fix it." Sam was Dinah's husband, a jolly, stout colored man of all work about the Bobbsey place. "I think you'd better wash now and get ready for supper," his mother told him. "If I could put on my bathing suit and stand out in the rain I wouldn't have to wash. The shower would wash me," Bert said, laughing. "Oh, couldn't we do that? Could we put on our bathing suits?" begged Freddie. "Please," begged Flossie, who was all over her crying spell, caused by having been hit on the head when the ironing board fell. "No, indeed," laughed Mrs. Bobbsey. "This isn't summer yet. The rain is a cold one. I hope your father doesn't get drenched. But what made your elevated railroad fall, Bert?" "Oh, I guess Flossie or Freddie moved one of the chairs when they crawled under the ironing board to make believe they were under a bridge," the boy answered. "I didn't," asserted Freddie. "It was the thunder." "Well, maybe it was," admitted Bert. "It rumbled terribly loud, anyhow." "Hark!" exclaimed Nan suddenly. "Oh, is it going to thunder again?" cried Flossie, getting ready to bury her head in Nan's lap. "No, but I think I heard Daddy come in," said the older Bobbsey girl. "Yes, there he is!" cried Bert, and a moment later Mr. Bobbsey, his face sparkling with raindrops that had blown beneath his umbrella, entered the room. "All safe and sound?" he asked cheerfully. "Yes," his wife answered. "But if you had been here a little while ago—" "Why, what happened?" "Oh, my elevated railroad was wrecked," laughed Bert, and by turns the children told of the happening. "Daddy," began Nan a little later, as they sat by the supper table, the storm having quieted somewhat. "Daddy." "Yes, Nan," he answered. "What is it?" "Did you see a funny old lady with a green umbrella out in the storm?" "What's the riddle?" And Mr. Bobbsey smiled. "Oh, no, we all saw her!" cried Freddie. "And she had a big basket," added Flossie. Mr. Bobbsey looked at his wife to ask what it was all about, and she told briefly about the strange woman passing the house in the storm, carrying the big basket, which seemed to be heavy. "No, I didn't see her," said Mr. Bobbsey. "It's hard to see anything in this storm," he added. "Is my rubber coat here at the house?" he asked his wife. "Why?" she wanted to know, looking quickly at him. "You aren't going out again tonight, are you?" "I'm afraid I'll have to," he replied. "The river is rising with so much rain, and I've men moving back some of the lumber so it won't be washed away. But I'll not be gone longer than I can help." The Bobbsey twins were disappointed that their father could not remain indoors with them and tell stories this stormy night. But, as he explained, it was needful to look after his lumber, many great piles of which were on the very brink of the river that flowed into Lake Metoka. "I started men moving back some of the piles before I left to come home to supper," he said. "I want to go back now and find out how much more is left." "Could I come with you?" Bert begged. "No, I'm afraid not, little man," his father answered. "You couldn't do anything in the darkness, and you'd only be in the way. Could I go down tomorrow?" "Maybe. I'll see about it," promised Mr. Bobbsey. He put on his big rubber coat and went out into the storm after supper. The thunder and lightning seemed to have passed over, but it was still raining hard. Mrs. Bobbsey let the younger twins stay up a bit later than usual, but at last their nodding heads showed her that it was time they went to bed. Bert and Nan soon followed, and Mrs. Bobbsey sat down to read until her husband should return. The wind howled mournfully through the trees, dashing the rain against the windows, and more than once Mrs. Bobbsey looked up and shivered a little as she thought of her husband out in the storm trying to save his lumber from being washed away. "That poor old woman, too," mused Mrs. Bobbsey, as she thought of the one with the green umbrella. "She looked friendless and forlorn. I hope she finds shelter for the night." She kept on with her reading. Presently there was a rumble of thunder, not so loud, however, but that Mrs. Bobbsey heard the ringing of the front door bell at the same time. "I wonder who that is at this time of night, and out in all this storm," she said to herself as she arose and walked through the front hall. Before she reached the door she heard a patter of bare feet in the upper hall. "Mother, did you hear the bell ring?" answered Freddie. "I heard it. I haven't been asleep yet," called Flossie. "Is that Daddy come home? I want to kiss him." "No, it can't be your father. He has a key," said Mrs. Bobbsey. "Go back to bed this instant, children. You'll catch cold in your nighties. Go back to bed." Flossie and Freddie did so, though they did not want to. Mrs. Bobbsey went to the front door. There was an electric lamp outside, which she could light by pushing a button in the hall. This she did, and glanced out before opening the door. But, to her surprise, she saw no one standing on the steps. The rain was running down the grass in little streams, but no one could be seen. "That's strange," mused Mrs. Bobbsey. "I'm sure I heard the bell ring, and so did the children. Perhaps it was someone who made a mistake and got the wrong house, and after they saw the number they walked away. My, how it rains!" She went back to her reading. Again came the distant rumble of thunder, following a flash of lightning, and again the doorbell tinkled. "That must be someone!" exclaimed Mrs. Bobbsey. And, she said afterward, she had a queer feeling as she again rose and went to the door. Before she had a chance to switch on the light and look out she once more heard the patter of bare feet in the upper hall. "Flossie! Freddie! You mustn't get out of bed again!" she called up the stairs. "This isn't Flossie or Freddie. It's me," said Bert, in a low voice. "I mean, it's I," he added, as he recollected that his teacher had corrected him for saying that in class. "Who's ringing the bell, Mother?" he asked. "That's just what I'm going to find out," answered Mrs. Bobbsey. But when, once more, she looked out on the rain-swept porch, she saw no one. "This is certainly queer!" she exclaimed. "Did you hear the bell, Bert?" "Yes, Mother, I sure did. I thought it was Dad." "But there's no one here," said Mrs. Bobbsey. "Not a soul. Oh, well, maybe the lightning rang the bell." said Bert. "Does lightning ever do such things?" Mrs. Bobbsey wanted to know. "Yes," answered Bert. "We had a lesson on electricity in class the other day. Not much, just a little one. And teacher said it did funny things. I guess it could ring a doorbell without anybody being near." "Well, perhaps it could," admitted Mrs. Bobbsey. "Certainly no one is here. Better get back to bed, Bert." "I will, Mother." Just then a noise was heard at the back door. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Natalia.